Have you ever thought about how much goes on in your brain when reading and writing? Literacy is a process that uses several complicated systems, like visual, auditory, and cognitive. Think of a time you had to spell a complicated word. What strategies did you use? You may have closed your eyes to try to see the word, or perhaps you actually wrote it out several different ways. Maybe you even imagined writing the word in space. If you used any of these methods, you were accessing your visual memory of the word, trying to see which one looked right in print. This is called orthographic processing, or using the visual system to form, store, and recall words. Readers look at letters and words on the page and use their knowledge of sound and symbol relationships to sound out tricky words. Eventually, the visual memory of this word makes it a solid memory in the brain to be called on later. A word memorized in its entirety is called a sight word. Otherwise, every word we read or write would have to be sounded out, meaning that reading and writing would take a lot longer. When you began to learn to read, you may have noticed the spelling of words often had patterns or rules. We teach young children sound relationships or phonological knowledge to help them learn the system of sounds in language. When asking them to read, we want them to use these skills to sound out words. For example, a student will easily sound out a word such as hat and recognize the letters and sounds associated with them because each letter and sound is reasonably straightforward in that word. What about other high-frequency words early readers encounter which are not so easily sounded out, such as the or of? For these words, students rely on their visual memory, their orthographic processing, to remember words and recall them later when reading and writing. The orthographic process develops side by side with phonological skills gradually and over time until a student has a solid base of words stored in long-term memory that are easily read without sounding out. For most students, the process of learning and remembering words by sight is simple. While it may be confusing and at times frustrating trying to remember the vast amount of rules involved in the English language, the majority of children will be able to learn to discriminate and decode differing sounds. Some children, however, have difficulty developing the visual memory necessary for these irregular words and spelling patterns. The confusing rules about the letter G, for example, sometimes hard as in girl and sometimes soft as in giraffe, silent as in the word though, or even paired up to make a completely different sound as in the word laugh, can be overwhelming as they attempt to rely on the rules of phonics alone. Students with weak orthographic processing skills aren't able to make a mental picture of words in their brains. The skill of writing words in the air or visualizing them in the mind isn't developed, and these students rely completely on phonics to read and write words. Because they decode all words instead of learning words by sight, their reading sounds choppy and is not fluent. Even letter shapes can be easily confused because their brains don't retain the memory of specific letter forms. They may mistake B and D often, or read the word when as with, even though they read it correctly earlier in the day, because they are relying on the first W to guess the word. How do teachers know if a child has an orthographic processing issue? Educators can look for some telltale signs of orthographic processing issues, such as letter reversal, especially with similar forms such as B and D, trouble remembering common sight words, confusing similar words such as when and what, inconsistent and apparent guessing on simple, repetitive words such as of and the, reliance on phonics when reading beyond when students should rely on this strategy. As a reminder, phonics is when a person has to sound out most or every syllable or sound of a word when they read it. Difficulty with writing skills due to the inability to visually recall information, and reluctance to read out loud or very low ability to do so. Eventually, children with orthographical processing issues become frustrated and come to view reading and writing as a moving target they can never quite make sense of, even while their peers around them seem to grasp these skills. This is in sharp contrast to the development of confidence and trusting in the patterns and rules of spelling that teachers aim to develop. Specific intervention programs can help students with orthographic processing problems. Instruction designed to encourage the brain's ability to make mental pictures of letters is necessary to laying the foundation for this skill. Teachers begin with individual letters, teaching sounds for each and not moving on until the student has mastered the skill. When the student's orthographic processing strengthens, simple three-letter words are introduced. Children begin to trust both the rules of spelling and their ability to recognize them. Their sight vocabulary will increase, and they spend less time decoding. They are able to remember words and recall how to form letters when writing, and their skills continue to grow once the foundational orthographic processing skills are present. As fluent readers and writers, we rely on processes in our brain. Our ability to see and recognize letters and sounds uses the orthographic processing system. Orthographic processing is basically using the visual system to form, store, and recall words, such as writing a word out in the air in front of you. Early readers are taught the relationship between sounds in speech and the letters that represent those sounds, also known as phonological thinking. They decode words and begin building up a memory of how frequently used words look, and this memory builds a cache of sight words. Eventually, most words we read and write rely on our orthographic skills. A word memorized in its entirety is also known as a sight word. Students who struggle with basic sight words have frequent word and letter reversals, guessing at words, reluctance to read aloud, or rely on decoding, like phonics, which is when a person has to sound out most or every syllable or sound of a word when they read it. A skill that should be developing alongside orthographic skills may be having orthographic processing difficulties. This can also lead to choppy reading because the student is relying on decoding and is unable to use their sight word knowledge. A specific, targeted intervention can help them build this part of the brain and confidence in both themselves and the rules and patterns of the English language.